XLA violations that honestly businesses just can't handle. So at the end of the day, how does RFID solve these problems? Well, Mario's going to walk you through what he did, but essentially we offer a solution that truly automates the IT asset management process by providing information on the asset location in real time. And that's regardless if it has network or power. So it could be sitting in a storage room, it could be in the loading dock, it could be out on the data floor, or into the gray space or decommissioning, and we can tell you the real-time location of that. The environmental problem is solved by leveraging the same infrastructure used for asset tracking, but to provide real-time information at the rack level of what the environment, the assets are operating in. So when we couple the environmental monitoring with our asset management solution, this allows customers to react quickly to any situation affecting their most critical assets. And we do this for some of the largest data centers in the world. I would invite you all to visit rfcode.com to view some of our case studies, and you can read how companies like IBM and CenturyLink achieved a very large ROIs using the RFCode platform. And with that said, without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Mario. So Mario, please take it away.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan. Thanks for Mark for a great introduction. So I worked for a large healthcare company in North Texas, and one of the fundamental problems when I first started being responsible for our data center facilities, the common question I would get asked is, tell us where these expensive assets are at. And you know, I've been at this company now for 17 years, and at the very beginning, for me, it was very difficult to track things down. Where is this server? Where's the ones that were easy to find were things like generators and PDUs, right? Those are big floor-mounted assets that are easy to find. The harder ones to find is a small server that maybe one team moves around, or a network device that another team is moving around. The way we started, if you get in your Wayback Machine, were basic barcodes that were issued out by our finance department. The only place that barcode had any reference was in the depreciating asset type of system. It didn't know anything about location until there was lots of guesswork, hoping we could find it. And oftentimes, if we were trying to now retire an asset or get rid of it, it became trying to figure out, is this the right line item? Is that the right one? Are we deleting the right thing? Very challenging to make sure we were getting it right. And being good stewards of those assets that we were responsible for. Within that space, as myself and some other guys started getting more involved, we moved to we started implementing our own naming convention. We started applying our own tags and working in conjunction with finance. So we found a very basic IR barcode scanner. So now we could develop where things were at, naming convention, some way to track it, and then feed that information back over to finance instead of them giving us a sticker, which we were doing previously. That worked okay, but we still had a problem with movement because there's lots of people that work in data centers. Things change, parts get replaced. How do you keep track of it? And it was still a manual effort if we had to go through and scan devices within cabinets, hope we could find them, and see if things were up to date. And very quickly we found the information that we had in our database was only as accurate as the day we put that sticker on a device. If anybody's using those types of systems, I'm sure you recognize that challenge. Right around the 2018 mark, we had an opportunity to move to new data centers. And so we took that opportunity and illustrated the challenge that was happening and needing to track and account for when we were going to take something out of an old data center and move it to a new one. And that's when we reached out and we found that an active asset management system was going to really fit the bill. So we spent time, we tagged everything within our legacy data centers so we knew exactly where they were at. By deploying those kinds of things, when we went through the exercise of migrating and those lift and shift movements of moving from one data center physical location to another, we could see things actually leave a location and show up at the new location. I could measure time between shipments, and we could identify exactly which cabinet something went into when it landed at the new location, which was enormously helpful. In the very first year, when we had an audit come through from our financial team to say, they came in and said, Mario, where is this asset? It was very simple. I could walk them right to the cabinet and show them. Oftentimes, I would try to send them a report ahead of time and go, it's here in this cabinet, and here's a real-time stamp of when that item checked in. They still, if you're familiar with finance folks, they still want to put their hands on it. But it made it very simple. I could walk them right to the cabinet, show them the tag, show them the name of everything, serial numbers, and it matched up perfectly every single time. So it was very simple, very easy, and they really appreciated now the higher degree of accuracy we were able to present with all of those things. As we move forward, because we had made this investment and demonstrated how effective active asset management was, we started looking for other ways to add value. One of my other roles and part of managing a data center is not just asset management, not just racking and stacking, but also managing that physical security posture within the data center, everything about layer one. Well, part of that is video surveillance. We're in a colo facility, and the colo provider does a lot of that for us. But within the cage, I have a responsibility to make sure that what's happening inside of there, up and down each one of my rows. I have a responsibility for temperature and space planning. The active asset management system allows me to know how much space, how many U's are within the cabinet are being filled, because we're keeping that information accurate. I get able to capture now video surveillance around what's happening, as well as now I also add in human being tags so that I can track when people come in. Every year we try to add new features and functionality and increase the use cases within that I can perform and get out of a single asset management system. And so we've been very successful by closing more gaps, closing audit findings that haven't even been found yet. And so that's working out very, very well. What we try to do, oftentimes, we try to leverage, as we scaled out, we try to leverage a technology as much as we can, try to stretch it as far as we can. We've actually moved our asset management system beyond just the data centers, and we now have deployed those same active sensors in network closets around. We have close to 500 MDFs across 25 facilities, probably 400 clinics in and around North Texas. So lots and lots of assets, close to 5,000 networking assets alone. And then that allows us now to have in a single repository the physical location of things stored across, 4 counties. Makes it really nice to feed all of that then, whether it's in a storage facility, and it's not just now the data center team using this, it's our network operations team, it's our server engineering team, and even some other teams. We now bring all of that physical asset information. We can feed it to our finance team. We can now also feed it up into our ITSM system. And by marrying all of those things together, we now have a common layer of data to start from for that that physical asset lifecycle, which makes it really nice as we start planning for the future. We know exactly what we have, we know exactly where it's at, and we know exactly what to plan for when it's time to start cycling those assets out. That's an enormous benefit, because there's lots and lots of use cases that are very valuable, And when they come from the same set of data, then that information is accurate across all of those, as opposed to lots of different data sources, which then could lead to drift in that asset inventory information. So that's when we start getting into the active asset, right? Active asset, I spent a lot of time looking at lots of different options. Like I said at the very beginning, we went from physical tags and barcode readers. I investigated the passive tags often. When we started looking at trying to decide what was going to fit within the data centers and how could it also be leveraged out at the facilities, passive tags kept getting brought up because of somebody like Cisco says, oh, we put a passive tag on all of our equipment. When we started looking at the infrastructure challenges there, it became very apparent that a simple system where we could easily manage readers and not have to tune a lot of door portals, then that active system became much more appealing. It became much more accurate and easier to manage. That's why we went with an active asset management. It's been very successful. We focused in the data centers first. This isn't a representation, but it's a representation of the data center, not exactly mine, but pretty close in how we started. When we started, we had to try to figure out what's that distribution so we had a good coverage of these readers, especially in metal cabinets where the tags were going to sit, what the volume of tags were going to beacon back in so we could have a good distribution. The RFCO team was great when they came out and did an assessment of our data center, and we were very easily able to add enough readers, place them strategically within the facility so they could capture a large amount of tags. And within the system, then we basically built out a hierarchy of what is all of the cabinets, so we knew where things were at. Once the readers were in place, then it was a simple process of walking through, tagging each individual device. And because we already had a lot of that data in a legacy database, it made it much simpler to go through and very quickly take an object out of the database. Here's server X. Here's the new tag we're slapping on it. Place that tag on it. One of the great things that with the RFCO team we worked out is lots of different techniques on how to attach tags. Not every system lends itself to a sticker. Sometimes we had to use different types of tags to connect it, whether through the screws on the front panels of servers, or because of the amount of cables, maybe we had to shift where that tag was at. A lot of different versatility in that. And once that tag is attached, it stays really, really well attached to the device, so it tracks whether we pull that device out, take it out of a cabinet, put it into storage, or vice versa. Gave us a lot of flexibility. We've actually added a receiver into our storage and receiving rooms, so when new items come in, they're tagged immediately as a first step. Before anything gets powered up, before we're immediately tagging it and documenting things like PO numbers and requisition numbers. So now those financial types of numbers or supply chain numbers track along with the tag number throughout the life cycle of that piece of equipment. So we know who bought it, when it was received, where it went to. And so when we start adding then more information about maybe what is the new name, we can always go back and find that device even if somebody doesn't remember the name. They can always look up, well, what was the original PO? What was the original rec number? That, by starting at the very beginning, before it's powered on, allows us to have very, very accurate asset tracking. We know now, because we track it at the very beginning, then we know when it moves into the data center floor. We now have a better understanding of its life cycle, when it goes, gets plugged in, when it shows up in a cabinet. Now that we're also working on, we're adding more integration with RF code, we're now able to detect when it gets on the network. Was this device, as long as we start batching up, is it in this PDU? Is it in this? We're starting to track things like outlets, where things are plugged in, and marrying those different pieces of information together so that we can start saying how many, not just how much U space is consumed, but how many outlets within a cabinet are available. You know, whether we have enough in the A side or the B side. Do we have enough power within that cabinet for a new system? We may have enough U space, but do we have enough power? So that's where those APIs have really become beneficial, starting to marry that data together to get a much deeper understanding of where do we need to plan for space, where do we need to shift equipment around, or in some cases even request new cabinet space and new power from our provider. See, yeah, now you can see that as we've added into the rack, once we've added that device into the rack, it's obvious where it's at. And it's very nice because now my peer managers, who actually are some of the people responsible for the equipment, can come to me. I can allow them to log into the system and they can see exactly where their system is at, where it's being managed, and if we can support more equipment for that particular use case, or we need to start moving to a separate cabinet. That was the first problem, right? The first problem was physical asset management. How do we do that better than a sticker? Well, we solved that problem early on. The next problem we found and we wanted to get ahead of was, we can call it the human element. If those of you who've been in data centers, you know, technically, right, you should not be tailgating, but people always do. You're always going to open the cage for somebody and somebody else is going to follow through with you. It's really kind of impractical to say everybody badge in, everybody use their fingerprint one at a time and walk through. By shifting that and by talking to those people who were authorized to be in the facilities, enabling them by giving them an actual RFID badge to go along with their authentication badge, now the system detects that they're there. So now if 2 or 3 network guys walk in together because they have an issue in the middle of the night, I'm not going to slow them down by putting in this rule that everybody has to badge in one at a time. You may think, well, that's kind of, why not? Every little step, helps, as long as we're keeping those guys moving forward with solving problems, but yet we're still meeting the requirement of knowing who's in a facility, who's in the space, who's working on systems. Each one of those guys who are authorized to go in an unescorted fashion, they all have RFID tags, so now we know exactly when they've walked into the cage. We even now are getting down to the point where we know which cabinet they're in, which is very beneficial. So now the next stage of that same integration is tracking not only which cabinet are they in, but was there an active change control or an incident that they happen to be working on, and why they were there. So for when we go through our security audits, and the security auditors come and ask me, well, what are we doing to have some positive controls of activity in the data center? Now I can show them. I know who's there. I know why they're there. I know when they were there. And then the added layer after that is we've also added in the video surveillance piece, and now I can show them the video clips of where they were at the time that they were there. All of those things tied together within a single system has basically closed gaps that several auditors hadn't even thought of yet, which is really nice. So we get ahead of auditors before they think of problems. and we constantly keep trying to look for opportunities to enable technicians and engineers to solve problems, still meet very high and rigid security controls, but make it easy to get work done. We kind of walk through these things. I know I went pretty fast. We'll have an enormous amount of time for questions. A lot of what we do is figuring out where things are related. Physical relationships, in my mind, is a foundation. I also do performance monitoring. I run our NOC, I run our data centers, and I run an analytics team. So that allows me as a data center manager to really focus on not just a single problem of a single piece of device, but how does that device affect the larger systems, affect the application that it supports, and ultimately affect the delivery of a service, which ultimately affects patient care. So understanding when we have systems connected to A side and B side power, A side and B side network, understanding those because we have that physical relationships documented in that physical asset system allows us to feed that into a CMDB, our configuration management database, which then influences how impactful change is or how impactful an incident is. That same then capacity planning and understanding what type of physical hardware we have, how much capacity we have in those systems, then leads us into, can we repurpose equipment? Are we using the right equipment in the right space? A perfect example is we were able to plan out a replacement of legacy blade chassis with rack mount servers. And by doing that and planning ahead, we were actually able to reduce our power requirements and reduce space, free up space within the data center. But because we were able to look at the information in our asset system and understand the scope of what an existing piece of equipment, we had maybe 4 cabinets of blade chassis, 4 chassis high, each cabinet having 60 amp power in those. Planning ahead, we now realized, okay, we can actually shift that workload down into 2 new cabinets with 30 amp circuits because of the change in technology, and planning ahead and having the right information. That space and capability planning, understanding where temperature impacts, temperature spikes, whether it's incoming or outgoing, whether it's at the top or the bottom, allows us to really plan much farther ahead and prepare. By having that space planning capability, it allows me to then to move into detailed reporting to illustrate to my leadership why we have maybe an empty cabinet, because that's really not truly an empty cabinet. It's dedicated space for failover or for replacement gear. If you buy a new storage array, you can't rip the old one out and put the new one in. You have to give it time. You have to be able to put both of them online at the same time in order to replicate all of that data. So if all of a sudden you give up all of your space and you don't have space for that new storage array, which, if depending on how you're handling things, you're replacing something every 4 to 5 years, people will ask, why do you have empty cabinets? Why can't we fill those up? I have those already earmarked within the system. This is dedicated swap space, dedicated failover space for things like large networking, core equipment, all the different kind of core technologies has dedicated space so we can have an upgrade path for that equipment. And I've already dedicated that cabinet space. That detailed reporting allows me to then go back to my leadership and say, we need more power. I need to add more cabinets. I need to add more power, especially when we can get ahead of the larger project planning and see what's happening on the horizon. This is when we get beyond looking at just what happens at a given individual hospital. as we move into things like a virtual desktop world, and we start moving away from individual physical desktops, across our 25 hospitals, then we get into a scenario where if I need to move that VDI infrastructure into a data center, how much power, how much cooling, how much rack space is that going to take up? And how do we prepare for those kinds of things? This was a big involvement as we did that. And I was actually able, through the detailed reporting, be able to articulate that we now have something like 60% of our power in 15% of our cabinets. It's a big dichotomy that people aren't necessarily used to, but then you turn that around and it still shows as a cost savings in the larger project. People recognize how valuable that is. That large enterprise projects aren't just about what the customer sees. There's also that underlying hidden cost that a lot of people don't understand or recognize because it's in a data center, and those kinds of costs are often obfuscated from billing when you can't see how that cost affects a specific application or a specific service that you're delivering. Having a integrated active asset system has allowed me to plan for multiple scenarios, fitting everything from our compliance aspect of managing physical assets, from managing the temperature and humidity, those kinds of things within the data center, adding those capabilities into networking closets, which oftentimes are not as rigidly managed as a data center, because whether they're in a hospital or in a professional building, a business office building, now having a positive control and information about assets across our enterprise lets us know where things are deployed and where things are implemented and where things are at in storage. That's a huge benefit for the different teams, where they can quickly go and find the asset they need when they need to replace a device. It gives us positive information for the security team as we engage with them on vulnerability management. They know where devices are at. They understand the relationships of those devices, what things are plugged into where. It allows them to know what the surface area of risk is of a given vulnerability. Then we move into that physical access. Within the data centers, we're actually scaling out our video surveillance and door sensor capability with RF code out to our closets. So now we have physical observation in network closets. That allows us to now say, if somebody gets into a closet that maybe shouldn't be, we have an opportunity to be flagged about that. We get an alert about that. We know when somebody's going into a closet. And now that same level of observability within the data center, we move out to our network closets. That gets us all the way down to having a clear, positive control across our core enterprise services, especially networking, all the way out to the customer. One of the other features, and we haven't rolled it out yet, the idea of emergency response, especially with those physical tags, they have some ability where we can actually turn on alerts. So if somebody falls down, almost those classic "I've helped and I've fallen, I can't get up" kind of thing. We have those buttons on a badge, which that will be something we'll be implementing in the next year, is leveraging those for perhaps a distress. If somebody's gets in trouble, whether they're hurt physically or need help, they can press a button and notify my 24-hour operations team to then engage whatever action we choose to take. So lots of opportunities all within the same system. That's one of the things that I really like. And because it is API driven, then I can integrate that into other features, mass notification systems or event management systems, SIMs for the security team, or ServiceNow, our ITSM platform. Constantly looking at new ideas, new opportunities, looking for problems within the systems, looking for problems within the human system of trying to make sure that we're not inhibiting engineers from solving IT problems, not putting physical security in the way of them solving IT problems, but enabling them to do it easier, faster, and still be compliant. That's my primary goal in all of these things. So we're always looking for opportunities to do something new, do something better, and continue to improve on that. The automated tracking of our physical inventory, the real-time environment monitoring, and pushing that asset awareness and adjustments out to the edge is one of the things that's pushed us a lot farther along our story. I think that's where we're coming to an end. I can pass it back to Mark, because I screamed through that.
Okay, Mario, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Folks, again, if you have a question, type it into the Q&A tool. We'll try to get to all of your questions if we can. First question is, how long did the implementation of the RF code system take?
So for us, within about 2 weeks, we were up and running. The services team from RF Code was able to come in and deploy the readers, and they actually brought resources to bear to go through and actually tag, take our existing data and apply the tags and update everything. And within our legacy data centers, we were up within about 2 weeks. It was a phenomenal implementation.
You said that the system's API driven. Was that a custom built API, or are there existing?
No, it's their RF Code's open API. And then it's really kind of up to my imagination and how much I push my internal team to connect to other tools. We use RF Code's API to extract data and feed that into ServiceNow. We take information from SolarWinds and feed that back into RF Code. And then, of course, the integration with the video surveillance cameras is RF Code using their own API and adding more flexibility with other products that they're selling.
Okay. Great presentation. Can we get a copy of the slides? Yes, we will send you an email tomorrow with a link to a PDF of the slides as well as a recording if you want to go back and review this presentation or have your colleagues review it who weren't able to attend. Which active technology are you using? Is that the same technology you are using for the employee badges?
Yes, it's all the same active technology. It's all from RF Code.